Yeah, okay. So is this true? June 12th, 2016. Do you know what happens on June 12th of 2021? I think you do. Because you may know what happened on June 12th of 2020, right? June 12th of 2021 will be the 65th anniversary of major presentations of information in the uh, congressional record that, among other things, discusses what I understand to be very significant outlays connected to infrastructure within the United States, as well as reference points that are associated with the military pension system. But it also discusses matters related to a time frame during which the United States was in the course of indicting and prosecuting members of the gas and oil sector that had been involved in illegal activities, very highly illegal activities. That also happened to correlate with a very comprehensive investigation of racketeering involving the judicial branch of government. Those are my reference points for June 12th of 2021, which would be 5 years after June 12th of 2016. What's to say Ukraine throws all but kitchen sink at Russia's bond lawsuit? It's a Bloomberg article. My relationship with Bloomberg is sketchy at best, right? But here's the thing, there are four arguments presented in here, presumably discussing a lawsuit filed in the London courts concerning Russia and the Ukraine and a bond that was issued by Russia to the Ukraine concerning the former one of the former heads of state in the Ukraine. There's four arguments. And I understand, if I'm correct, somebody right now is evaluating this in a concurrent process, or rather using another case, including a case that has long term implications, somehow in connection with this. And it makes sense because, from what I know about that case, I can see why that case would be considered to be relevant. But it may compel, or rather, request consideration of a counter positioning, or a counter uh, perspective. Because I'm looking at these arguments and I'm like, hey, I made these arguments on one manner or another. Argument one, the contract is void until Russia complies with international law. Ukraine broke its own rules to sell the debt. Russia pressured Ukraine into signing the contract. Russia broke the contract by hindering Ukraine's ability to repay. This is one of those things, whoever wrote this, it's in the British court system. And I know somebody like to identify themselves as a barrister, and I'm not a barrister, right? I'm not. And I have my own understanding of the relationship that the Magna Carta has to the Constitution, but I've talked about that before. Here's the thing that's very concerning. Russia's use of force against Ukraine and interfering in its neighbors' internal affairs constituted such a violation. There's a difference between being targeted with directed energy weapons, including in a possible alleged law enforcement proceeding involving some form of surveillance that is executed at a distance but has not been revealed to you, that may be impacting you, and you have not been provided with any confirmation that that is what is going on. That is different than, for instance, being in a situation where you've been illegally detained and put into a form of rendition, or rather illegal detention that legally qualifies as a form of kidnapping, and subjected to intense psychological pressure, as well as an attempt to force drug you and accuse you of being mentally incompetent in the course of the detention, so as to then also deny you the ability to obtain education and or room and board while you're trying to pursue that education, as well as transportation, and hence you end up missing out on that schooling and that room and board, and may have to make a decision like, well, I want to go to school, But if I go to school, I'm going to have to sleep outside because the place I have to sleep inside is too far away and is unavailable if I want to go to school, right? Those are different considerations of context when you're talking about something like use of force, like restraint, right? Illegal or use of restraint versus having an understanding that you're being targeted, and so you seek some sort of legal assistance in providing you with a means by which to attempt to engage the legal system to protect yourself. Those are different conceptualizations of what that means. I'm just letting you know. Number two, broke its own rules to sell the debt. Broke domestic law by selling the debt. A, was it actually debt or was it obligation? Was it part of a pre existing capital outlay process, or was it allowed to be used as a lien in a pre existing obligation? And because you were the first lien, somebody else got to apply the lien on you in order to deal with what was going on in their regard to dealing with their obligations. See, those are different matters, especially if you're talking about domestic laws around actually, literally contextualizing what it is that one is dealing with. For instance, you're there to report something that is concerning to you as a public safety hazard, or maybe there are possible problems with people trying to access that which is not supposed to be accessible to them in that particular area. And somebody wants to say, no, this is about you being billed for medical treatment, right? You're breaking laws, but depending upon how you define what's going on, there's different laws that are getting broken, and that means that there are different people that are culpable with those laws getting broken, right? So this is, different than saying, well, somebody did these things that were illegal according to domestic law, especially if you're talking, for instance, about a very comprehensive conflict of interest regarding the fact that somebody's trying to get you to provide them with a particular kind of material support when they've got other interests, including involving a claim that could potentially involve a lot of restitution from a public entity that you may or may not yourself be invested in, or as somebody's trying to offset losses associated with a very large investment that they made that was high risk from the onset and then ended up not coming through at the time they thought it would. And so that ended up going down, and now they owe for that, right? Those are different considerations of what is breaking the law. Here's the pressured into signing the contract. It's different if you're locked up in a way and they're trying to force drug you into agreeing that you received services and you're there for services that you did not receive and you did not agree to. So you take the contract and you write on the contract and you let them know that you're in a situation where you're under duress and you did not actually receive what it says, and hence ends up altering the contract to reflect that they are literally engaged in fraud by demonstrating they had an intent to defraud by trying to get you to sign you had received something they knew you did not receive. And then if after you sign that with the additions indicating you did not receive these various things that are put into that contract that you received, then they threaten, if you do not engage in activity that would be illegal based upon the terms of the contract that included your alterations, they threaten to have you remanded to somewhere else that's more severe. In effect, either exile you or detain you in another facility, including for a longer period of time, and increase the pressure and duress. That is different than, say, giving somebody a contract and saying, I want to make sure that you understand what's going on. So here's somebody else that I know that's in my professional network, and he is going to help you with any questions you have in reviewing this contract and then that person ends up engaging in coercive efforts to down the play whatever the concerns are this person expresses, saying I don't think this is legitimate, or this part of the contract doesn't make sense, and or this said one thing at the time, but because this person did not clarify or disclose that, it shows that there was an intent to engage fraud, and as a result of engaging that fraudulent contract, that person ended up losing out on a variety of different things that could have otherwise been available to them. And then Russia broke the contract by hindering Ukraine's ability to repay. Again, was there even a debt? Was there an obligation? Was there, right here, it says, the annexation support of rebels forced the government in Kiev to raise defense spending. Defense spending has a very specific underlying value, including and especially if you're talking about other investments you have to provide for. And it makes a big difference if you're using defense spending as a means by which to fulfill an obligation versus as a way to address a debt or liability. It also has different international and administrative implications, including in regards to national sovereignty. But it also speaks to who is available to be used as an asset base. If somebody puts an illegal debt on you, forces you into, or puts you in a situation where they say you owe them, and then they determine that in the course of you owing them, there is a particular asset base that they'll accept, and it happens that that asset base that they'll accept based upon you having no other options is actually illegal for them to be able to use in consideration of debt repayment. Well, that makes a big difference if you're talking about defense spending or if you're talking about something else, right? And if you're talking about being barred access to any other resources, and then if you're talking about receiving aid from an international entity that ends up leveraging risk and then would then make you engage in activities that are unsafe, including for your nation and including in consideration of having to leverage assets that are actually illegal for you to use in those kinds of activities, well, then that is a very, very specific, different matter than allowing for whatever ends up happening when you protest that to be put through over and over and over and over again and be used for the creation of defense articles, and then to have to deal with the risk that those defense articles might be used against you. This is a very significant difference. I'm just saying this right now. This is just what came up all of a sudden. Is this what you call soi sponte? I didn't know this is what it was about. You know, the problem is that if it was going to take them 2 years to adjudicate this case, if it was going to take them 2 years to consider this case, and that part of what was going on in this case is an understanding that major, major deals that were supposed to yield for certain countries were coming due during the time frame within which this was supposed to be adjudicated. And then there may be some determination about the legitimization or the legitimacy of the arguments as well as the decisions that could be rendered based upon what happened with those other obligations. Then, you know, the events about which I just spoke would have been happening during the time frame during which this was adjudicated, which brings up the question of, was I put in a situation where I was attempted to be exploited in order to impair or impact the relationships between two foreign sovereign nations in regards to a matter about which I had never been provided with any disclosure in regards to me having any involvement in, but since then has been revealed to be very instrumental in events that have happened in my life, in the lives of people in my community and communities, going all the way back that I can first tell to 1996. 1996, if I'm not mistaken, 1996, either July of 1996 or July of 1997, Russia took out a loan from the World Bank and was alleged to have been in a situation of default. Now, I already know Events in my life totally correlated with that, but I didn't know that at the time. These is way, way, way too many concurrences for there not to be something directly involved, which then brings up the question of, is somebody being leaned on in order to lean on somebody else? Is it even Russia's bond, right? And if we're talking about the International Monetary Fund, there's a big difference between having to deal with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.